Okay, welcome to the 2020 Q3 Town Hall where we review the last quarter. My name's Kenneth Bell. I'm the CEO of SCP Corp, the company that is developing the ScPrime project and the EXA network. And without further ado, we'll dive right into this. Give me just a quick second here to check one level and then we'll go. Okay, everyone's pretty familiar with this graphic that we're about to show here, and the situation is that we're building a distributed network to provide cloud storage to businesses, and the market opportunity that we see ahead and the total addressable market is very large, but we're still very much in the flat part of the curve. And maybe for the next quarter when we do the review, I will slide this over a little bit to the right to reflect that we're coming up on 2021. But even in 2021, we will still not be very much into the hockey stick part of the chart. Let me go ahead and do this so you can actually verify that I exist and I'm here. So this is the chart that informs everything that we're doing. We expect that over the course of the next decade, 5, 10 years out, that as we get into that large up and to the right part of the chart, that things will get really interesting and that we have a few years ahead of us to sort of get this distributed concept, decentralized concept, working correctly and to address and grab enough market share. Hard to say how it's all going to turn out. There's a lot of different players trying different things. We think we probably have one of the better strategies for that, but again, this chart will continue to show up at the beginning of these probably for the next year or two, and we'll see what happens going forward. Okay, getting started on reviewing the quarter. Typo right out of the gate. Quarter 1 review. No, this is Q3. I'll fix that in post. But okay, Q3 review. Essentially, this was a very interesting quarter for us for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest is that we recognized that in the span of the quarter, there were several very decent milestones that we could point to and say, look, we actually have achieved certain things that were, pretty indicative of the progress that we'd been making. Up until this quarter, I think there were still a lot of people out there that really weren't even sure if we were real or not. And, it is what it is. But those milestones that we celebrated over this week period that we call Days of SCP, the first one was really interesting, was 1 petabyte of network capacity. And we still call our network testnet. I mean, it's literally from a cryptocurrency standpoint, mainnet, when tied with the blockchain, it's fully functional, does pretty much what it's supposed to do from the blockchain smart contracting standpoint. It does actually allow you to use the community renter. You could upload data to the network, you could download data, but it isn't really the network that we expect to be selling to customers, the EXA network. So we're still calling it testnet. It's probably not going to be called mainnet when we go live, but we'll have some term for it. In any case, we have 1 petabyte of storage capacity currently on that network, and it's very performant and very consistent storage. One of the things that's really nice about our network is we have a group of providers that are all very recognizing, that they need to stay up to the cutting edge on the versions, not go too far too fast, not stay behind, and ultimately keep their provider instances online available. And so we have a very consistent network already in place. It could literally be used today to serve up real corporate storage. It's obviously not big enough. We don't have enough global footprint yet, but we're still actually in a pretty good place. And hang on a quick second. Yeah, thought somebody was pinging me about the presentation, so Never mind. Okay, and so that was the first big milestone that we celebrated in this quarter. The second big milestone that kind of was a milestone. It actually was a revisitation of where we started out. When we first launched the blockchain back in 2018, we did have hash rates that were approaching 3 and 4 petahash. But then as things started to wind down in 2018 and 2019 with the bear market, people drifted away and we dropped down quite a bit in hash rate. And it's taken us a fair amount of time to get back to 4 petahash, but now we're there and we've been holding it pretty consistently for the last month or two. So I suspect that that's probably going to be baseline going forward, and we'll probably even see that number rise as we go into 2021. Another interesting part of the blockchain was we hit block 100,000. Sort of indicates we're not going anywhere, that we plan to be here for a while. And ultimately, we expect the blockchain and the proof of work concept to carry us for at least another 2 years before we really seriously start looking at some kind of a different consensus model, and transition away from proof of work into something like proof of stake or proof of capacity or proof of storage or whatever it ends up being that takes over from proof of work. For now, proof of work is still the most secure. We dominate the Blake 2B algo, and ultimately it's been a very good scenario for us. Another big thing that happened, we talked about this in the last presentation, was that we had pre-announced that we had reached our goal on closing the raise, but in the last presentation we had only reached something like 480,000. When we finally closed the raise this time around, we were able to close at $602,500. So that was a really, really nice milestone for us, and very much allows us to do what we need to do to get the MVP to product launch at the beginning of next year. Following the raise closing, I was able to negotiate and work with everybody in our team. We've now got contracts signed with everybody. And I've signed a contract with the corporation to remain on as CEO. That's not much of a surprise. I've worked for the last 2 years without a salary or a paycheck, so now that I can have a paycheck, that's actually pretty cool. So yeah, I'm committed, and so is the rest of the team, and so we're really excited about what that brings for the future. So boy, I hope all of these, no, I know all of these are going to have that same typo. So Q1 review, no, Q3 review continued. MVP chaos alpha status. We'll talk more in the development slides about exactly what's going on, but what essentially happened in the alpha version was we got into a mode where we started doing testing with our singular client, use air quotes on the quote unquote client, and what happened was we started to realize some things about the S3 protocol that we would need to go back and take care of in order to, make a truly compliant protocol API. And so what ended up happening is we kind of stopped on the demo uploads and the testing uploads for a bunch of development work that needed to get done. That's all coming to a conclusion now, so probably over the next week to 10 days, we'll start to see that data uploading happen again, and we'll probably have to spend about a week to 2 weeks in that alpha data testing process, but not much longer than that. So we're already starting to talk about, and we've posted on the Discord and on Twitter and Facebook that we're seeking beta testers for the next phase. The next phase will run from about the middle of November to the end of the year. And what we're looking for is people who have companies that do regular ongoing backups. It's not critically necessary that they use S3 currently today. In fact, my guess is that we would prefer people that are not currently using S3 clients, but it's okay if you are. We can use the feedback from either folks that are currently using things like Commvault, VM, other storage partners, or just S3 compatible applications like Acronis, or even people that are doing raw API type calls in their own development software. Or if you're using something else right now and backing up to just tape libraries or backing up to hard drives or backing up to servers, and NAS devices, whatever, definitely we're looking for those kinds of folks. I have turned away a couple of people. Specifically, I turned away somebody who came to us and said, look, I'm actually looking for something that I really have a need for real production backup immediately, because we're in a bit of a problem with our company, and can't afford to send it out somewhere. And I really didn't want to take on a production client yet. This is really the next 6 to 12 weeks really need to be about proving the concept works, more than it has to do with actually selling storage to people at some percentage off what they would get at Amazon. We'll get there. That part will happen very shortly after we validate the hypothesis. But for the next beta testers, we're looking for people to help us to iterate and to do what we're trying to do. And at present time, based on the calendar, things do look like we're going to make it just fine in terms of launching at the beginning of the year. Hang on a quick second. I keep getting people pinging me, and I think they're pinging me about the town hall, but they're not. So I'll probably just close Discord so I don't have to deal with that any further. Okay, let's see. Where are we here? Let's go to the next one. Okay, development is really the big part of this town hall, and I think we'll be able to kind of talk about a lot of what's happened over the last quarter, and maybe provide some elucidation into exactly what we've been doing. It's been very quiet in our Discord in a lot of ways, and we've been very quiet because really all the magic's been going on in the kitchen, and the cooks have been working, and so let's talk a little bit about what they've been doing, and who they are and what we're looking for, and blah blah blah. So right now, as I said, with the ability to, after doing a capital raise, we've been able to sign contracts with all of the team to do the work that we're trying to achieve. The contracts that we've actually written with everybody run through 2021. We'll talk a little bit later about actually buttressing that as we go forward, but essentially everybody's not locked down, but into a contract and willing to work. It's a mix and match of full-time and part-time. What we're sort of doing is we've put a couple of people so far onto full-time basis. Actually, right now I think there's 3 people on a full-time basis, and as we are able to, we're budgeted to move more people onto full-time, but we're not going to actually be doing it with the whole team until actually we get to product release, until we actually start seeing revenues coming in, and it makes sense because some of these people have pretty cool jobs as it is. They're not quite ready to leave them, but in every case, the ability exists to leave and to come aboard full-time. We just have to do it at the right time. We are looking right now for another senior back-end developer. This is somebody who's fluent in Go, somebody who has good infrastructure background and capability. So if you are that person, or you know somebody who might be that person, please steer them our way. We'll be doing some regular headhunting, putting up a standard position description here shortly, but I thought I would go ahead and pre-announce it here in this thing in case anybody happens to tune in along the way. So over the course of this quarter, we've done a number of different things, and so a couple of them that are really interesting have to do with our own stack. So one of the things that if you're kind of new to what's going on with SCP and what we're all about, yeah, we did fork another project. We determined almost immediately that we would not be able to use the other project's stack, that it really was not suitable for a true production-based distributed network for business cloud storage. This judgment's actually been made by other groups that tried to do second layers or doing second layers on that same protocol. It is what it is, and then the original development company's gone off, and now they're doing sort of a whole different direction anyway. So we started over essentially with the core blockchain and the smart contracting, and we're working on some servlet applications that were created by one of the original project's founders, and what we've done is we've first of all, when we started out, our binaries were essentially 6 or 7 different binaries that had to be built each time we wanted to actually, instance a test client and pull it together. Well, one of the things we've now been able to do is pull all of those different servlets, the different little repositories, into a single relayer repository. And now when we build an instance, we build one single client application, which is really cool because that's really showcasing that we are now on the path to having our application on the way, and we'll have a deliverable when we release that the customers will be able to use. Now, customers won't actually be downloading the binaries and so forth. The binaries that we're building will get run on initially centralized server instances. The clients will then use API calls. They'll use strategic partners like I mentioned earlier, VM, Commvault, Rubrik, you name it, or other S3 compatible applications. Over time, as we start to roll in more decentralization into the process, what will end up happening is that those server instanced centralized wallet instances will then become decentralized, and the customer themselves will choose where to run those, whether they run them on the cloud, whether they run them internally, whether they run them in a combination hybrid. But for now, those will start out centralized, and then that will be the piece that will get decentralized over time. Along with that, there was a lot of integration work, continuous integration work that was done, a lot of unit testing, lint, building binaries, all of that stuff. So there were a lot of updates that we did to the GitLab work so that we would have a very viable instance in our repository for more developers to come aboard, for people to actually come aboard, figure out exactly where they are and what they're doing and understand the process. There was some advanced CI that we put in there for automatically doing integration tests that were tied directly with our database. The production database that we're currently using is Postgres. We'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to fit in a couple of slides forward. We did a Docker compose to spin up these relayer instances so that they didn't have to be manually pulled together each time. This is going to be really important, obviously, because when we start doing an MVP or even in the beta testing process, we're going to need to be able to launch multiple instances on our server network, our server array, to actually spin up these instances, populate a wallet with coins, and actually set that up with some sort of level of storage capacity based on what the customer's expected storage is going to be. In the beta tests, that'll all be free, so customers and us will negotiate with the customers as to how much storage they need on their beta test. We're not looking to upload people's entire tape libraries in the beta process, so yes, there's some free stuff available there. After we actually release the MVP and we see how it's all working and the performance of it, we will definitely put together some promotional stuff. There will be some level of free storage for people to do some trial basis, whether it's a 30-day basis or whether it's some number of gigabytes free. And then that will start in the first quarter of 2021. Probably won't happen at the immediate launch of the MVP, but it will happen shortly after that. We did some other things where we configured GitLab runners on our own servers so that we didn't have to screw around with running out of minutes and so forth. We're currently in that process right now where we're budgeting and figuring out what all of our internal IT needs are going to be, what versions, what levels of software, what server arrays we're going to be instancing for our own internal work. And we're still using a mix and match of open source and paid stuff internally. So, some of that stuff is the development that we're doing is just to set up our own infrastructure so that we're ready to take advantage and be ready for when we do actually launch a paid service and we start having a bunch of people beating down our doorway. Pavel actually wrote a set of development guidelines, best practices in using the Git, and how we move forward and all of that sort of stuff, so that when we do start adding developers rapidly, that they all work to a constant standard, and that there isn't a bunch of, hey, why do we do it this way, or how do we do this? I'm used to doing this in my old gig, and blah blah blah. So that was a really helpful thing. And we went through a pretty involved telemetry planning process that we've now sort of completed. We have outlines, full outlines generated for what we expect to have out of the gate for telemetry. For those that are maybe not familiar with this term or this process, what we're talking about is metrics. And on an open source project, for some of the projects that are out there like Filecoin, or for instance, you'll see that they have a lot of telemetry that are available to the general public, and they end up using that as a marketing tool, and we'll definitely have that as a basic instance of telemetry that we currently have out there. You would look at the ScPrime Stats, which is our Explorer that's out there that 420 Coop actually operates. And so what we're looking at doing right now is building out a whole set of metrics gathering, not only for presenting real-time information, being able to look at a map and say how many hosts and where are they across the globe, or being able to look and see whose hosts are online and whose aren't, and so forth, but also, that whole thing of instancing it all into a database, and then keeping that database over time so that you can provide the nice graphs to sort of show, network growth over time, performance over time, and not just as a network-wide capability, but on a per provider capability. We're going to be breaking it down into tiering, so you want to be able to say, I want to just grab these 5 providers and see what their average performance latency metrics look like. So there's a whole bunch of telemetry that we're going to be grabbing and storing and then feeding back. Some of it will be available to the general public to look at, on an ongoing basis, and some of it will be dashboarded for our network operations center. Some of it will only be dashboarded for our network providers, our storage providers, and so forth. So there will be a wide variety of dashboards available. And so now we're kind of at that place where we're getting started on that development. There was a fairly significant discussion and hold up there because we got locked in with our coin precision. Anybody who's familiar with our blockchain knows that our coin precision was really kind of squirrely when it was decided way back in 2014, 2015. There were some, assumptions generated that ultimately proved out to not necessarily be, required. So we ended up with coin precision that stretches out to 24 decimals, which is kind of interesting because it really makes data acquisition and how you store data and what kinds of databasing tools you can work with, and what data types essentially actually can address that level of decimalization. So it did kind of cause us a little bit of back and forth in determining what tool. Some of the other people that are doing tools on these Blake2B based blockchains are using things like MS SQL and just some basic database architectures like that. One of the things that we realized along the way is that we're going to need to work with very significant databasing tools beyond just that. We'll have a Postgres core architecture for for the data to actually be held long term, but we're also looking at time-based databases. And I think one of the ones we're looking at real heavily right now is Timescale DB. We looked a little bit at Elastic. We're also looking at Influx and a couple of others. Timescale is interesting because it's actually based on Postgres underneath. And so the idea is what we're looking at a tool set that can really grow rapidly if we do get to scale early in next year and we start seeing thousands of storage providers and then commensurate amounts of data being uploaded. The tools that we currently see out there likely are not going to be capable of handling the kinds of numbers that we're talking about, and definitely not over time as we start to hit the growth curves that we're looking for. We have also a network appliance developer now contracted. We announced, although we haven't launched anything in the way of a website yet or a product announcement, but we have announced to the community that we are working on a network appliance. It's a very important part of our strategy going forward, and we have now locked in a contract with a developer. He's been working away on it for about 2 weeks. We have a whole set of initial planning documents for the device. This device in the picture is pretty close to what we're probably going to end up with for the Generation 1, simply because we don't really want to spend a lot of money on ODM right now. At some point going forward, we will probably tweak that chassis. We'll do some plastic injection molding work and really build something that's a little more sexy and exacting to our specifications. But this one does a pretty good job of what we need it to do. It's about the size of a football and ultimately can handle 4 Rust drives. So essentially, if you figure 18 terabytes as, you know, sort of maybe the peak right now of consumer grade spinning platter drives, then, you know, you're looking at a 70, terabyte potential array that we can send out there in these appliances. My guess is that most of them will go out with significant less storage than that, but we have planning documents that are covering the initial OS instantiation on these, the UI that's going to be involved on them, and the various things that users will need to do from a maintenance standpoint with these devices over time, like what happens when a hard drive fails. There is some redundancy on these for the metadata, so there's some issues there. What happens, if the customer decides they want to actually wipe out our instance and actually turn it into some other kind of a NAS device that they want to use, because they're buying this on their dime, so ultimately they're going to be able to do what they want. But when they first get it out of the gate from us, it's going to be a locked-in configuration. There's going to be very little that they can do on these devices. It's mainly built to be a plug-and-play environment where they plug the unit in, it just starts mining storage, and they never have to deal with it after that. The only thing they have to do is log in, register who they are with it. There will be some KYC AML on it. They will have to, write down obviously their address and all of that sort of stuff so that they, can know where to go to send the coins then off to exchanges when they want to sell coins and so forth. And then, of course, like I said, some utility work in case of things like drive failure or whatever. And in those cases, what will end up happening is we'll just overnight a drive to the user. They'll pop that in, they'll run a script, and it will, stand up the new drive inside the rig. There's not redundancy on the main drive configurations, the storage configurations, because from a financial perspective, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense just to go ahead and eat the loss, let the repair traffic go to other storage providers, and put a new drive in and go forward. Work in progress going forward. We'll talk a little bit about this. I'm not going to stay too long on each of these, but the things we're currently working on right now are multi-user support. So typically what happens in backup and archival applications, which is what our MVP is all about, there's usually 1 or 2 people that are tasked with that, and they tend to have like one account at some place like Commvault, or they use an application. But we want to have the ability for multi-user support coming in to those accounts, and we also are having currently on our centralized server configurations, we have a single wallet instance actually that services multiple customers. So that's also part of multi-user support. We still have to get contract development out of the way. Right now, contract development on our relayer client is manual. You have to go in and select the host you want to use, select the erasure coding ratios you're going to use, and then manually go out and form those contracts and so forth. When we finish up with alpha testing and into beta testing, we'll be doing almost across the board all the hosts. So, if you have a provider on our network and when we get into full testing, you don't get immediate data uploads, just be patient, you will. But we need to develop the accounting, we need to develop host selection, we need to develop contract formation routines, all the stuff essentially that, is already operational in SciAD, but in many cases, stuff that we're going to be changing significantly, like how contract selection's done. It's not all going to be a one size fits all in our product release, as we've discussed. There will be different tiers, different ways that you access contracts, and different decisions that go into forming those contracts. Right now, all that stuff's very manual on the old project. In our case, that's the stuff that we're going to be focused very heavily on making automated into Q1. We'll need a basic web app, obviously, so people that aren't using Acronis or aren't using some other backup application, there's going to be some need to basically log in, see the buckets in a web app, and be able to upload files directly to them. Most people don't use the AWS console to do their backups, but that capability will work. We need to do some work with storage proofs, the randomization process that's going on. That's going to be pretty easy to accommodate and accomplish. And like I said, the provider tiering. We're finishing up on this, well, not finishing up, what I should say is we're deep into this host.io implementation. What happened in our initial rollout and what kind of pushed us back a little bit on development was that we got into a mode where we realized on the S3 API implementation, the S3 gateway that we're developing, that we were really locking it all together so that anything that we were doing would be making changes to live data out on the network. Plus, there were some things that we needed to do going forward with deferred contracts and some of the other things that we'll be developing, that we realized we needed this new module called host.io that would divorce the process of working with hosts from the gateway implementation, so we could make changes to the gateway and not have to be actually out there talking with production data. So that thing's pretty far along. There's going to be ongoing development with host.io for some time to come, because it's going to be one of those things where we'll be able to prototype and do test data and test tweaking when we start doing this, things like dynamic contract set development and so forth. So, but we're fairly far along with it, and it's far along enough now that it actually works directly with our S3 gateway and will be able to be used in the beta testing that we start delivering over the next 6 to 12 weeks. We have a hard fork coming up to change the emission once again for the SPFs that are on our network. We won't get into the I'm not going to relitigate the politics of what happened for that, but suffice it to say we're going to make an emission change, and that's going to be happening at block 109,000. I'll talk about that a little bit later here in the presentation. We also need to set up and develop a consensus server back on our own servers. This will feed the network appliances. We have this set of white papered proposals called deferred contract updates and new RPCs. Specifically, copy from is one of those new RPCs. These are the things that we're developing that solve a lot of the problems that we identified early on the protocol. Specifically, there were two major problems. One was contract asynchronicity, one which is that the whole thing really tends to slow to a crawl when you get multiple people accessing the same contract set, because it's essentially delivered one after the other, that when somebody's actually got contracts being updated for more storage, or different contracts need to be added on more hosts, or anything that goes on with actually changing the contracts, what happens is the contracts get locked, they can't be accessed, and so it's like the DMV, and there's a whole bunch of people waiting in line. And that was always the biggest reason why we realized that the original application can't work as described. So we went to work in our own proposal, and deferred contract updates and the new RPCs are the last piece of that puzzle, and will allow us to get into a performant world where contracts are not locked away and stalling people from being able to upload data onto the network. The appliance stuff that we're working on over the next 6 to 12 weeks, we've got to put together a final BOM, that we're going to be passing off to our China partner who's going to be building these units. That will be the full hardware configuration. Right now, we had to wrestle over a few things, whether they would come with wireless or not. They will. Some of the things, whether we would have an external power supply or whether the power supply would be internal. I think we've determined it'll be internal. We still have to negotiate on pricing and costing of all of that sort of stuff. We still have to develop the user interface once we get past the core OS load. The UX is going to probably borrow heavily on some of the concepts that Nate has done in SIA Central work with Host Manager. But again, this user interface is going to be very, very basic, and there will be very few things that the user can go in and actually tweak and tune. Long term, we'll probably make a secret switch for users to be able to go in and enable so that they can become more hobby hosts and tweak and tune. But for most of these rigs, when they go out, this is a side hustle for people. People are going to buy these units to make money, to mine, to ROI, not to spend a lot of time becoming, experts in on how the storage provision works, and dealing with all of the things that we see almost on a daily basis in the network channel in our Discord. These are going to be really very much hide them away in a closet and forget about them. That will be our metric of success. There are a number of internal services that happen that we talked about that have to get done, like how does addressing happen, how does how do the units get an address that actually maps out that storage provider address to the local user's IP address and so forth. We'll be doing all that automatically. The user's not going to have to go out and get a no IP address or anything like that. So that's to come. And just before I get into this, so essentially all of that work in progress, if things work as planned, most of that work in progress will come skidding into the landing strip right around the end of the year. As things go in development and as things go with blockchain development specific, that often doesn't happen that you hit your deadlines, but I feel pretty good that we're going to hit our deadlines at least in ways that will materially allow us to call the MVP released and to allow customers to begin to start to use our network. Maybe the appliance will be in a v.1 version or a v.1.5. We'll definitely ask for some beta testers for the appliance, by the way. So if you're somebody who's interested in that, please contact us as well. So all things considered, we're still looking very much at an end of the year time frame. Moving on now to just looking and doing an inventory of the project itself. We've added a few providers to our host network. We're currently up to 83. Again, we're trying to reach that 100 mark before we do MVP and call the network fully functional. 78 active last time I looked, which was this morning. 1.036 petabyte of capacity. Now, one of the things I will say is we're probably going to be very transparent about what our capacity looks like over the coming couple of quarters, maybe I would say. But what ends up happening as you get into a full production mode and as we start selling storage to clients, that number will disappear into the background and will be harder to get and will not be as legitimate. And the reason why that is because there's a lot of thin provisioning that goes on in data center work, and as we move out from appliances to getting overages from mid-tier data centers and so forth, a lot of times the numbers that will show up as provided capacity don't really work out to being accurate. In other words, they may say they got 500 petabytes of capacity, but when you really drill down and if you're able to audit it down to real hard storage, it might only be a fraction of that, 25% of that. Doesn't mean that the 500 isn't available or can't be made available, but it does mean that the numbers that are being given out by various entities don't always mean what they say. So it's a number that won't be used by us as a marketing number over time. It's not used by people like Amazon. Once we get into production, the real number will be used storage. Today, the used storage doesn't is meaningless to us because there is none, no real storage yet. It's all test data. And it's all test data for virtually everybody else in our space, by the way, right now. So when you see the numbers, they're really meaningless. Once we start actually selling and taking money from people, that's the number that becomes important. One of the things that we pay out every month to providers is an extra incentive layer on top of the rent that they earn for providing the storage. The incentive layer will, as I said all along, get driven deeper and deeper into the protocol. At some point, it will become a part of consensus. For now, it's still a pretty manual process, but it will get more and more automated as we go through these quarter reviews. We paid out a grand total of 59,872 coins this last quarter in incentives, and at current valuation, that means we paid out to those 80 some providers a little over $5,000 in network value. And understand that's $5,000 we paid to a network that has no actual storage yet and no customers. So it's a great time to be a provider on our network right now because you're getting paid way more than you will ultimately get paid for being on the network. And you're getting paid essentially to help us spin up a viable testing platform that can convert immediately over into a production network once we start accepting live customers. So if you haven't set up a host on our network, really now's the time. It's a great time. It's spec hosting, I guess we'll call it, and you can earn some decent coins to do it. You actually earn more being a host right now than you do mining our coin. That's a little known secret. Miners that want to keep running ASICs, hey, I'm never going to discourage it, but at the end of the day, if you have some computer storage to throw on the network, you should do that as well. Moving on to mining, current inventory sort of the mining world. The block reward right now, our blocks decay on a 0.01 per block basis, and we started out at 300 coins per block. We're now down to 179.97 per block, so not quite halfway through the emission schedule, but we're getting there, and that means that there are less coins per block. And in another 2 quarters, 3 quarters, coins are going to start getting scarce. They're already in a place where people are starting to say, hey, these are getting a little bit more scarce. And that's why you're seeing hash rate kind of increase, because people are really trying to get a hold of the coins now. Of that, actually, I sort of misspoke there. It's actually 199, but 179 go to miners and 20 still go to the project. And that will continue for about another, I think it's something along the lines of 6 months. I'll have to go back and look at it. But at block, I want to say 150,000, but don't hold me to that. There is a block ahead of us where the project fee gets turned into a coin burn. And so right now what's happening with all of the coins that are going into the project fee, most of them have already been distributed, by the way. What happens is when our coin had no value for really the first 18 months of its life, we had to give away a lot of project coins to developers because guess what? We didn't have any actual funding coming in with real hard dollars. So it was the only thing we could give to people, and they were worthless. And so our team worked for about 12 to 18 months essentially on a spec work basis. They got a lot of these coins, but essentially it was coins that were valued at nothing, and they were gambling that in the future that these coins will become worth something. That's what those 20 go to right now. They still go to some of our new people that we brought aboard who are working to reach what we consider to be a threshold where we stop paying those out. The original people who started with the project in 2018 are no longer receiving coins. They've reached their ceiling, and they've all got their wallets, and they will not be receiving any additional coins from that payout. Hash rate is 3.64 petahash when I look today. The network hash rate, which includes the unknown pools and is the randomized sort of guess, is a little over 4 petahash, so that's looking pretty good. Let's see what that looks like on the chart. And this is really kind of showing what's happened since we did our initial fork. When we first launched back in 2018, we had a significant amount of hash rate show up. Compared to what was going on in the original project, really though, it was minuscule because there was about 100 petahash at the time available that was mining. Well, most of it got put into warehouses, and about 3 to 4 petahash came aboard with us. Some went to some other projects. They've all but died now. We're literally the only one that's still operational. But over that period of time, you can see the hash rate declined significantly, even getting down to a place where it was under 1 petahash for several months over last year. And then what happened as people started to see these other projects die and fade away, and as people started to realize, hey, we weren't going away and that we were planning to be here for the long term, and that we had announced, development initiatives, and things were starting to come together, and then the project funding update, and just as stuff happened over the last 2 or 3 quarters. Well, you can see that the hash rate has responded positively, and I look for that to go up. As I noted in the Discord today, again, we have identified a Chinese miner who bought 1,500 of the InnoSilicon S11s directly from InnoSilicon in 2018, which means that the units that they got have about 6 months worth of hard mining on them, but that's all. So they are essentially new in all sort of intents and purposes. If you're somebody who's looking to build a farm, if you're looking to build, a bunch of units into a colo, these units can be had. They can be negotiated for. The individual paid quite a bit for them. I think the number that they paid was $700 a piece back in 2018, but they're willing to take quite a bit of a bath right now to sell these units with power supplies because in their view they have no use for them. They haven't yet decided to spin those up on our chain, so it's a good chance to go ahead and get some miners if you're looking for some bulk purchasing. The coin, our utility coin, SCP, we put ourselves onto a third exchange over this quarter. Probit is a Korean-based exchange, has a lot of activity and a lot of volume, about comparable with what our last exchange ad, Whitebit, was. They're both top 40 CMC CoinGecko exchanges. Probit has a little bit lower in the way of KYC requirements today. That's probably all going to change because of the BitMEX fallout, but currently it's very easy to sign up and work on Probit. And actually, one of the things that happened over the last quarter is that Whitebit also dropped KYC for under 2 Bitcoins. So if you couldn't get onto Whitebit, you probably can now. If you're in the United States, in both cases, you're probably still going to have to play around with things, maybe do a VPN. I don't know. I'm not giving any guidance on what you do, but people that are using the exchanges, even from the United States, are reporting good experiences. They're both very much Binance kind of looking exchanges, and definitely the volumes over there are much higher than they are on South Exchange. There's still a lot of people that prefer South or want to stay on South. I mean, do what you want to do. I'm not going to discourage you there, but it's a small exchange. It's an exchange that really is sort of begging for some of the law enforcement stuff that's coming along. They get DDoS'd regularly, and they end up going down for significant periods of time, and they have conferred to us that, or at least they have not been able to confirm, I should say, that our coins are kept in cold wallets. So it's great that we have more reliable, larger exchanges now. This gets us into a platform that we can start shooting for a top 20. Obviously, that's our core goal, is to get onto a top 20 exchange. Bittrex, Poloniex, Binance US, Binance Global, any of the bigger ones. We definitely will get one over the coming 12 months. But at this point right now, we have 2 mid-majors, I guess we'll call them, and I highly recommend you give them a try because they're pretty good. Average daily volume is a good indicator of what's kind of been going on, because all time, if we go back to the beginning of the blockchain, we average out to about $4,000 a day in volume. If you just take the Q3 to date, that volume's up to as much as $14,000. So we are seeing a lot more activity on the coin, and I look for that number just to keep ballooning upwards as we go forward. All right. Probably going to run about 30 more minutes on this one. Like I said, this one's going to go a little bit longer. We've got a lot of things that are really interesting that are coming up. This is going to be some breaking news right here. I have only told one other person about this besides some people on our team. So this is going to be interesting for a lot of people. People that have invested in our project actually haven't even heard about this, and we'll hear about it later this afternoon. So if you're tuned in and you're an investor, you're probably not, but if you are, you're going to be hearing some breaking news right now as well. So we are going to be doing this hard fork at block 109,000, and we are going to be changing the emission schedule for these SPFs, the ScPrime funds. Now, everybody knows how it kind of worked on the other project. There were 10,000 available. They got sold illegally originally. They never got put onto exchanges. They ran up to some absurd valuation. There's literally one guy that has escrowed 90% of them when they have traded hands. They've sold on places like Bisq that nobody uses. And essentially, it's been this kind of under the table thing, right? And crazy, right? Like you're buying shares of Berkshire Hathaway from a guy in an overcoat. It doesn't make any sense. So what we're going to do, what we originally intended to do, first of all, we talked about forking out the original ones because as we, went over ad nauseum, we came to loggerheads about, them not supporting us and us not being willing to pay them for not supporting us. So, those are going away. But some people argue that it doesn't make sense to actually do the blockchain where you delete their coins. Ultimately they could fork, they could keep the legacy chain alive, they could do whatever they want there but what we've decided instead is to do something a little different. And I think it's going to make people kind of interestingly happy. We're going to actually change the emissions significantly. We're going to put out a crazy large number compared to what they currently are right now. They're currently sitting at 30,000. We intended to turn the emission to 20,000. Of those 20,000, I think about 3,000 have already been essentially given out to different people. That's team members, investors. None have been sold by the project to anybody. There was a individual who got some of the original investment last year where they got units that were given to them, and they turned around and sold them into the general public at like $250 a piece. But that was when the coin was selling at like 80 satoshis. So the coin now has gone up like 7x or 8x since then. Nobody's really had any units to try and sell on the open market. My guess is if they tried now with the coin price going 8x, maybe they're not 8x the valuation, but they're probably at least 2 to 4x that 250. So maybe $500 to $1,000 a piece. But still, that's crazy. That just doesn't make any sense to us. So what we're talking about doing is we're talking about increasing the emission to something like 20, 30, 40, 60 million. Okay, so like a normal coin. And then what that allows us to do is to take the units that have already been given away to people. So if somebody's been given a unit on our chain and they currently own one of 20,000, in the future world, they will own, whatever it ends up being. If we go 10,000x or 1,000x or 3,000x to get to that big population, then their one will turn into 1,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 or whatever it ends up being, and then they'll have a bunch of them. Okay, so nothing changes in terms of their percentage of tax payback that they get off the network equity itself. It takes 20,000 to get to that same number that they got with one originally, for instance. So why is that interesting, and why is that really fun? Well, first of all, now if somebody decides to go and sell one of them, they can sell them for like 50 cents a piece, right? Or they can sell them for like $1 a piece. So they can sell them for a quarter a piece. Now, if the thing runs up like 2018 on the other project, and one is worth some crazy, like 1.6 bitcoins or something like that, limits who can buy one, right? And limits who can have access to one. But now with the big population, somebody can buy, 2,000 of them or 200 of them or 200,000 of them and get, some what will ultimately look like fractional ownership, right? They'll get their percentage, and every one of those coins will still throw off SCP coins into their wallet as network use grows. So that's what's going on there. And these are the cold wallets that we talked about originally. This number continues to drop as far as the percentage controlled by the project. There is still that 6 million. The cold wallets have not moved since the beginning. But those coins, when they started out on the emission, were worth quite a bit higher, and we controlled a lot of the circulating supply. That number keeps dropping. By the time we get into the next year, 2 years from now, the project will control less than 10% of the outstanding circulating supply. And as we pay these out to grow the network, and we're probably going to pay a ton of them out over the coming year, that number will probably drop to a point where we're only controlling less than a couple of percentage points of the overall supply. As we discussed in the last presentation, we now have a website up with nothing more than just a forum for people to log in and say they're interested in being beta customers, or they're interested in the network going forward, maybe as a real customer after 2021. This whole network, this website will get updated soon as we start focusing on marketing. We're still in that process where it's all development focused, but over the next 6 to 12 weeks, we'll start focusing on the marketing, and you'll start to see this web page change a little bit. We have a lot of web updates that are due on the regular ScPrime website, so stay tuned on there, because there's some things with the team and positions and so forth that need to get updated there. What we're seeking right now are small company profiles that currently do regular backups, weeklies, incrementals, dailies, those kinds of things, to be beta partners right now to help us understand whether, this thing really can launch as an MVP candidate. So if you are somebody that does that for a company, or somebody that does, please have them get in touch with us. We're looking for 5 or 6 right now. Maybe we'll expand that number into the end of the year. But I'm really kind of being picky and choosy right now who I bring into that project. Because essentially what we want is somebody who can really help us iterate the client and make the client exactly what we need it to be as we get into release. Okay, thanks.